right, so this is a really cool slide. This is about market share. So we looked at the total number of students that are coming in by whatever segment you're choosing. So for example, and I'm not picking on Europe because it's similar to other regions, you'll notice if you look at the total number of students on the top or the far left there, it's been dropping. And we put together a CAGR, which is your compound annual growth rate over the last 5 years, and you can see that the total number of students has been dropping by about 4%. Okay? Again, you can select different regions or different cost bands to get a sense of what that looks like. The bars to the right are the same data, but as a percentage proportion. So what proportion of your cost band is within each one of these? Okay. All right. Now we look at performance. We look at the admissions funnel, near and dear to our hearts, right? The traditional funnel as you come down through inquiries all the way to the matriculated student. What percentage of students are we getting at the very end of the funnel, right? And this changes dramatically depending on whatever segment you choose. How are we spending our money to get those students in the funnel? And how effective are those methods for us, right? So again, to give you another perspective from the admission side. And then how are students paying for our programs, right? So how much are we spending on scholarships? I know Wendy brought that up this morning, and a discounted rate against how much the student is actually paying for the program. Okay, so it gives you a different perspective of what you see in the PDF reports. We can see the total number of scholarships and fellowships. And then, of course, corporate sponsorship. How does that break out in terms of fully sponsored versus self-paid students, and breaking that out by gender? We actually see a big gender difference in every region, right? Not surprising, disappointing, but not surprising, right? And then lastly, you'll see how are we deploying our resources, right? So how much are we spending on scholarships, operations, staff, faculty costs, and whatever's left over is net margin. And I realized that today when I was looking at this, we have net margin as the red. It probably should be green, right? Right. But this is an estimate, right? But you can see, like in this situation, you see net margin's been going up. That's actually true in a lot of regions because we reduced our expenses with the pandemic with face-to-face delivery. But we also look at, what's the headcount look like in terms of faculty, clinical versus tenured, how many FTEs, and things like that. Also, to the far right, we're seeing more shared services. How does that break down from admissions and different aspects between the different types of programs that may be in your school's portfolio, full-time, part-time, specialized masters. So it gives you a unique look at data from your custom perspective, right? Is there anybody in here that did raise their hand, they've used this? Yeah? You want to share what you've looked at?
Yeah, so I've actually looked at, I spent time on every single one of these pages. I've actually used it more instead of making decisions to confirm decisions and confirm some of the things that we're making. One of the places that I've spent a little bit more time, for example, on this page, the average offload compensation, because I found that that's really helpful to see where do we fall compared to other programs of similar price or within the similar region. Same thing with the application funnel. I look at the percentages at every single point along the way to determine how do we compare against our peers, again, price and region, to see are we having the same sort of yield on a placement by placement, whatever you want to call it, as we go through the funnel. So I actually look at it as a comparison. How do we look compared to the other programs in the comparable market, just to see are we on track. I haven't used it yet to make any broad sweeping changes, but more just to confirm what we're doing or to make some smaller tweaks.
Can I ask, did you look more at the cost bands or region or both?
I did both. I probably spent equal amount of time on both because I'm in the Southwest region, so I wanted to see how do we compare against other schools in the Southwest region, and then I also wanted to compare against our price point. Some of you heard me in a different program. The program I manage is a fully online, and so since we don't break this out online versus in person, the best way for me to do comparable was to look at the price band to be able to see that, because I know that our cost is comparable to other online programs based off of other research that I've done. So I looked equally between both.
Thanks for sharing.
Yep.
Oh, so let me also back up to tell you, you'll notice a little dialog box up here. If I have a pointer, this right here. So in the dashboard for every segment, if you hover over that segment with your mouse, you'll be able to see more detailed information about that segment. So you can really hone in and drill down with the data in here. Okay, and also every page in the dashboard is apples to apples. So whatever you're seeing on page 1 is going to be the same group on page 2, depending on you're making the same selections on the right. So it gives you a good sense of trends over the last 5 years. Okay.
Ryan, Matt?
Yeah.
I'm surprised about the decrease of faculty.
So you asked, you said you were surprised about the decrease in faculty?
Yeah,
Right,
in
right.
spite of the common size cash flow,
Right.
it really goes down and not from 29 to, I don't know, 4 or 5 or something. I couldn't
Right,
believe
this
it.
is Latin America, so
Yeah.
it's a little different, but, so it is common size, right, like you said, so we normalized it based on every 100 students to come up with that, so, but yes, that's the trend here, but also what's going on here, and that's, actually I think that leads into something else, is that our challenge with this data, especially as you break it down, the further you break it down, the harder it is to get representativeness unless you get enough people or enough programs completing the survey. So Latin America actually is one of the smaller markets, right? And this is based on all the programs that answer this question and everything else on this page. So that is a good point that in the PDF reports, you'll see everything for that segment, but it's actually the ends on this are going to be a little bit lower based on, you're seeing everything on this page has to be the same, the programs have to answer every one of these questions. Does that make sense?
Will that be disclosed what the end value is for all the different pages to assess that? Is that like 5 or is it 25?
It depends on what you select.
Right, but will it be on there? I'm looking where the end value is for Latin America.
Yeah, so actually, when you do the tooltip, it'll show you the number in each one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a little bit harder in Power BI. By the way, I didn't mention that earlier. We're hosting this in Power BI platform. We'll get to that in a second, and we'll tell you about why we chose that. Brad, did you have a question?
So this might be a simple question, but where do we find the dashboard tool on the website?
Oh, that's a great question, Brad.
I know I've used it many, many times, I was just wondering for other people.
Brad, you were supposed to ask that question after this slide. Okay, all right. Good question. So let me table that just for a sec. Okay. So who has access to this?
Well, actually, I do have a question about one of the slides. So I'm just curious why. On the, which one was it? The admissions funnel? Can you get back to that one?
Yeah.
It appears that the funnel on the left-hand side is an aggregate for whatever region or for whatever price point that you have. And I'm just curious why you did an aggregate instead of an average when everything else is based off of averages and percentages. Yeah, like on the right there for the advertising, for the marketing, recruiting spend, you do the percentages, and then on the left-hand side, you're doing the aggregate of the total number of inquiries. It appears to be the total number of inquiries, the total number of applications, rather than being able to see what was the average number of applicants, the average number of leads per school for the funnel.
Right.
So you're giving an aggregate, so it's just everywhere else across all the other pieces on the dashboard, you're doing an average with the percent, not an aggregate with a percent. So I'm just.
That's very observant, and there's a good reason for
Yeah,
that.
so I was wondering what the reason was.
Yeah. So when you're using a dashboard like this in Power BI, in order to get those percentages, we actually have to reverse engineer it and put the aggregate in to get the percentages to match up what the average would be, right? So this is per program in some cases, like, so this is by student, right? So, or by inquiry. So it makes sure that we average out based on the total that are on that page. So it's part of the visualization. The averages will be the same, but we have to do it in this way, and so that visualization will show up as a tornado chart. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah, sort of, right? Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, we can go into this more detail. I really just wanted to give you an idea that's what's in there.